Hello, I'm Dr. Tom Lee, and I'll be doing a number of the lectures in this 2020 U.S. History since 1877 course. The purpose of this segment, which will appear in the introduction to your course, is really to introduce history itself and to ask what history is, after all, so that hopefully you'll have a better sense of what you'll be getting out of taking a course like History 2020 through OpenBUCS or wherever you might take it. There was a study conducted by some scholars back in the 1990s, and they asked a large pool of Americans sort of how they related to history. And interestingly enough, different Americans relate to this idea of history in different ways. They get their history in different forms, and who they are often determines what they think about those various forms and how accurate they are. A lot of times when you ask people what is history, or at least it's been my experience, what you get is an answer something like, well, history is everything that ever happened, or history is the past. But there's a problem with that. And it's a far different sort of definition than certainly what professional practitioners of the discipline of history would think of as history. The problem with thinking of history as everything that happened, or just the facts, or the past, is that that's a sort of flat earth model. Every event is equally important, and the value of every event's the same. That's not what really history is, at least not the discipline, and that's what I'm talking about here. Sometimes it's the case that people confuse history and what we in the profession refer to as memory. History is not memory. We all have memories. We have individual memories, and as a society, as a nation, as human beings, we sort of have a collective memory. We remember events, and like historians, we as individuals often imbue those events with value. So, for instance, you might remember a particular birthday as being important, and you have a very clear memory of that. So you tend to think of it or value it more highly than you might another event, like one particular Tuesday you went to school and nothing happened. You get a little closer to history when you start thinking about memory, because memory is about value. It's about creating meaning. And ultimately, that's what historians are after. It's not about memorization. It's not just the past. It's not just what happened. History has to do with the creation of meaning. The problem with memory, very quickly, is, well, it's the problem with individual memory, isn't it? Often we create false memories. We have the capacity as human beings to remember things that never actually happened, or in ways that never actually happened. Most of us, for instance, remember, at least certainly here in the United States, remember the events of September the 11th, 2001, when planes brought down the World Trade Center Twin Towers. But each of us was in a different place. We saw it from different angles and different perspectives. And that's sort of what I was getting at earlier with the survey that was done that found, for instance, that many people get their ideas about history from Hollywood. But it's worth noting that certain groups in the United States have tended to see Hollywood's version of history as positive, while other groups have tended to see their representation, and thus the entire story presented by Hollywood, as very problematic. A good example would be a traditional Western, in which certain people are portrayed as the good guys, they wear the white hats, while other groups are portrayed in ways that are somewhat negative. It makes sense. Just as we all looked at 9/11 differently, we were in different places. I remember I was in the middle of a lecture, and I didn't know about the planes hitting the towers until I had finished the lecture and walked out into the hallway. And I didn't have at that point access to TV, so I got my news from the internet. That shaped the way I looked at that event. My memory is bound up with how I understood that event, and the fact that I thought that event was important, that I remember that day. And we as a society, I think, remember that day. So the question is, if history is not just the past, and if history is distinct from memory, which in many ways can be flawed, can change, can be transmuted over time, then what is it that sets history apart? As a discipline, more than a profession, as a discipline, as something you do, a process. And the answer probably goes back all the way to the 19th century. I'm skipping over a lot here, but if we go back to the 19th century, when professional history began, there were a number of ideas, really three big ones, tied up with what history was to become. The first was the idea that the past, no matter how hard we try, is insurmountably distinct and different from the present. We can never go back and render again the truth. History as it really was. We can try, and we owe it to the past to try and be as accurate as we can, but that's done with the knowledge that we can never go back. And even if we could, think about it, even if we could go back to the day Abraham Lincoln was shot, we would all be looking from different perspectives even then. But there's another side to this, which is, as human beings, we do have the capacity for empathy. That's to say that while I didn't experience the past, or while I may not be able to experience life in someone else's shoes as they've lived it, I can't know what's in their heart or their mind. As a human being, I ought to be able to have a sufficient sense of what it means to be human, to be able to see the world at least somewhat from their vantage point. And that's one of the great gifts of history. It allows you, kind of like literature for a moment, to step out of your own position in the world and think about that large, kind of glorious globe from a different perspective. But the third element's about process. To be a historian is in many ways to familiarize yourself with the evidence. The documents, the letters, the photographs, increasingly it'll be email and digital images, the audio recordings, the archaeology, whatever it may be that has to do with the problem you're trying to solve, with that riddle you're trying to unwind about the past. It's evidence that the historian has to keep coming back to. It's evidence that calls memory to question. It's not enough for a historian to simply say, well, that's how I think it was. Certainly that's how it's remembered. It might as well be mythology. Ultimately, the historian must take the meaningfulness of memory and compare it to what the sources say. And in this course, ultimately what you're being asked to do is not merely familiarize yourself with the facts, the names, the people, the events, the dates, but to take those facts and do what a historian does. Take the evidence and try and find a meaning in the past that for many people has an important ability to shape how we think about the world now. I hope you get a great deal from the course. It's put together to try to ensure that you have the best experience we could arrange. But ultimately, what I hope at the end is that you have a better understanding of what it means to be a historian, to be an American, and to be a human being. Thank you.